Well, my friends, thank you for being here and gathering with me this Tuesday within our high season of Holy Week. My prayer is that this is of benefit to you as much as it's been a benefit to me. Would you pray with me? Father, thank you for this day and the opportunity that you have given us to take this time to slow down our week and to pray and to explore your scriptures and more of what you are sharing um, on this day for our family and for this world. Lord, we ask that you take our meditations from our minds and the thoughts of our hearts, and that you give us the words to share and to comprehend and to be able to not only gain knowledge, but practice, to have the willingness to practice that which we attain. Lord, we pray for our family, for our friends, and those that couldn't be here in this busy week. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to gather in your name. May this be a time of edification and amount to the glory of your name. Thank you, Lord, for this day. Amen. The theme for this week, if you continue to follow the Lent devotional from Wright, is Jesus on the cross. This week, the scriptures that were chosen really puts really the reality of the passion of Christ, the suffering of Christ. And I think N.T. Wright does a wonderful job at helping us understand much of the feelings other than the facts of the passion of Christ. Obviously, the author wants us to explore the feelings behind all of the actions and the theology, the understanding that we have of what's really happening behind the scenes of Christ. Jesus, through the scriptures, we are able to see that he endures, carries, suffers, and accomplishes a great amount of things, even to this day. So I write this: Holy Week show us Jesus entering the darkest hours alone, bearing human sin, violence in himself, and going all the way through death so that God's saving purpose may emerge on the other side. If there is anything that I begin to understand this week, is that Jesus didn't want to drag his disciples through the passion of this week. It's not that Jesus was only alone or left alone. I began to really consider that Jesus really wanted to be alone this week. It's not simply that the disciples abandoned Jesus. It's that Jesus, anticipating the pain and the suffering of this week, decided to truly, it was the best thing was for him to face these events alone and not to drag his disciples with him. It makes me think about the story of the Titanic. There's a part, the movie, the Titanic, there's a part where there's a wealthy man who is offered a seat in the boats that are going to be floating and are going to be safe. And that position is given to him because he is who he is. He has wealth and fame. However, he says no, and he speaks on his behalf on third person. So let's say that his name is Mario. He says, there is no way the courage of Mario is going to be remembered. There's no way I'm going to choose to be saved while other people are die. What would people say about me? And so give it to another person. And he obviously drowns. And it's part of the movie. I don't know whether it's true or not, but does that make sense what I'm trying to say? Or I confuse you? I mean, will there be a moment in your life with your family or your friends that you will choose willingly to suffer alone so that your family is spared from suffering? That is what I'm beginning to understand. And I had never considered that Jesus truly preferred to be alone so that he would interact his disciples through this.
So he had to prepare himself.
Correct.
And that's one thing I noticed in this church, being Protestant. The week before, we had a reading in the back of the Psalter hymnal that we had to read prior to communion, and it was just preparing yourself during that week.
Mm-hmm.
Come the day of communion, we had the second part of that reading.
Mm-hmm.
And if you couldn't prepare yourself within yourself right enough, you did not take communion.
Yeah, that was part of it.
It was scary, reading all the sins
Mm-hmm.
that you had to really think over
Yeah.
during that week. And I think he had to sit there and really,
That's part of the consideration, the preparation. Yeah.
The one place where I disagree is with regard to the Last Supper, because he's really explaining the new covenant to the disciples.
Mm-hmm.
So he had a very real purpose there.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe much of the rest of the week he would have preferred to be alone, but he certainly needed to get that message through to them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying that Jesus wanted to be alone all week, but Jesus wanted to be alone at the parts that require much suffering. If anything, all of this has made me appreciate the fact that I was alone when I had the car accident. I was happy that I was not driving anyone in the car with me and that no children were with me. If somebody was going to get affected, I preferred to be by myself at that moment. Now, that week, that day, I was doing a lot of good things. And of course, I want to be with people when good things are happening because I want to share them. But on the day that I was going to be impacted, if I could choose to be alone, I will definitely choose to be alone on that day. And I think that is what's happening this week that I am realizing. That's something new that I had never considered. Obviously, my imagination makes me wonder. Jesus tells Peter, "You will deny me." And Peter says what? "No, I will not deny you." I wonder what would have happened if Peter would actually not deny Jesus. It makes me wonder. Obviously, it is foolish to a point to be considering something that are not there. But I wonder, what would Jesus done if Peter would have actually not denied? Would Jesus allow Peter to die by his side? And it makes me wonder, and obviously Jesus knew ultimately what was going to happen. And so Jesus knew the heart of Peter at that moment. And here is something where you have to...
We also, though, want to use this when we have the situation afterwards where after the resurrection he's asking Peter if he loves him.
Mm-hmm.
And 3 times he
affirms him. Yes.
Affirms him. So, I keep thinking in the back of my mind that he's so far ahead of everybody else that he knew that Peter needed this to affirm his faith and become the leader of the church that he wanted him to be.
Correct. Yes.
I guess it's a little bit, I feel like it's almost like espousing conspiracy theories. But so much of what he did had a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he maybe allowed this to happen or knew this would happen and wanted to be able to use it to better Peter's faith when he was departing.
Painful things. This is, You make me think about the painful things that God has allowed us to experience so that we can experience and mature in greater shapes and forms. I mean, so again, there's a lot of things that I have been considering this week because of the readings of N.T. Wright. And that is exactly what Lent is designed to do, for you to tilt the ground, to re-examine what you think you understand, and to try to gain clarity into what God is saying today to you. That is a work of Lent, to the re-examination of our lives and our dedication, whether it's painful or not, to re-examine where you are in life and to say, here I am, send me once again. That's the role here.
There's something in this first reading that I had never paid attention to before, noticed before. And when I see it now, it's making me think about God being with us at all times. It's when the angel comes down. I know I'm jumping ahead.
No. All of this is good.
Then an angel from heaven appeared and strengthened him. That's all it says. So I feel like, when we say the Holy Spirit is with us in these difficult times and maybe enables us to endure them or to get through them, here is Jesus experiencing the same thing, an angel coming and giving him the strength to endure what he has to. I don't know why I've never seen that before, of an angel coming down
and strengthening him. Yeah.
And that really puts a little bit of a different light on things in my view.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
No, all's good. That's for an introduction and overview of what this week is. If you have not done all the readings, obviously, our gathering. That's fine. That's fine. The only one that is anticipating all the readings is me, so I can finish this. But the role is that my goal is for this study that we do on Tuesdays not to be instead of your own readings, because there is so much that I don't touch. And obviously, I often put my own spin on things. And then sometimes I walked away from things that he says because of what I see. And so, I commend that you continue doing the daily readings of it. And by the way, remember that the next week, our Lent study doesn't end this week. It ends next Tuesday because it addresses what happens after Easter. And so we will continue meeting on Tuesday. And then the week after that, we will retake without missing a beat on the chosen.
What number?
Oh, well, let me go back through my notes.
Remember that.
Yes.
Let me know.
No, we will, and I'll put it in the bulletin because the idea is during Lent, we were going to do this, and then we were going to restart right away. And then we will meet at 2 and then restart because we're in the middle of season 3. So I wanted to really finish that part. So anyway, I will make sure that I put the information on the bulletin.
Okay.
So let us dive on the scripture of yesterday, Luke 22. Beginning of verse 39. Then, accompanied by the disciples, Jesus left the upstairs room and went, as usual, to the Mount of Olives. My home church in Barranquilla, Colombia, is called the upstairs room because the church used to be on the second floor of the education building of the church. And it was just one of those things that I'm always thinking about that when I read this. It makes me create fun memories of my old church. There he told them, pray that you will not give in to temptation. He walked away about a stone's throw and knelt down and prayed. Father, if you are willing, please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine. Then an angel from heaven appeared and strengthened him. This is what Dawn was talking about. He prayed more fervently, and he was in such an agony of spirit that his sweat fell to the ground like great drops of blood. At last he stood up again and returned to the disciples, only to find them asleep. Exhausted from grief, "Why are you sleeping?" he asked. He asked them, "Get up and pray so that you will not give in to temptation."
Every other part of that section I recall discussing many times over. Why is it that I don't recall that angel and a discussion of the angel appearing? Every other aspect of this whole reading is discussed time and time again.
Yeah. I have my assumption. I want to know if any of you have maybe a guess as to if you know this story and you know what is happening, why would you not consider the whole idea of the angel strengthening Jesus? Any guess?
Well, I just think we find strength in each other. The angel who
Mm-hmm.
is giving him strength, coming to church, you find strength in each other. You find
Yeah.
encouragement, and that angel's representing how we can go and find encouragement and strength from other people.
Yeah.
And you need that. Your faith is always going to go back and forth and falter at some point.
Absolutely. But I can relate to Dawn, and I can relate to you, but I can relate to Dawn because the same thing has happened to me. See, this story I know well, or I believe. And in the story is Jesus is what? Alone. That is the premise of the story. Jesus is alone. He goes alone into the garden and he prays and he's exhausted and he feels the weight of what is about to happen. And then he comes down and the disciples are what? Sleeping. And so you have this rhetoric, this story that Jesus is alone. And we can relate to that because we have always feel alone. But then someone comes and says, "Oh, but you're never alone." And you just brush it off. I was like, yeah, sure. I was alone in my car. But was I alone? That's the thing. So I think that our premise sometimes, because the scriptures we know well, sometimes they make us unbalanced into paying attention. In here, Jesus experienced loneliness, but he was never alone. He was not abandoned. He never requested, yet the angel came and strengthened him.
It happens just after he said to God, "I want your will to be done, not mine." And then the angel comes to kind of show him, I think, that God is
Affirming him.
Yes.
I mean, where's another scenario where Jesus experienced loneliness like this in the scriptures? This is the beginning of Lent. You remember the story where Jesus is taken by the Spirit into the wilderness? And it's Jesus and the trickster and with the temptations and stuff like that. And immediately after Jesus does what he does, the angels just swoop and care for him at just the right time. I mean, I can relate to what Don's saying. Here's the affirmation for us. When we feel lonely or loneliness, do we think and do we accept that we are alone? Or do we choose to believe that God is sending exactly what is it that we need at the right, appropriate time? Because God strengthened Jesus here without Jesus requesting.
As we prepare ourselves to handle difficulties in our lives, God is there.
God is there. Now, if you continue reading, there will be a part which says, the suffering of Jesus in the cross is not suffering of pain, but he experienced the absence of God, which he had never experienced. But, I mean, again, hold both them in tension. It's one thing what we experience. The other is the reality of God. in that just tiny verse, the story guide, the line of the story for us is that Jesus was abandoned by the disciples, even by his own mind. He was covering anxiety. But the scripture tells us that Jesus was not abandoned by God. The strengthened, that Jesus wasn't strengthened all the way to this point. It's a beautiful thing.
I'm blaming all the other pastors I've ever had.
It's true. It's true. It's true. I mean, there are so much things hidden from it. And,
That's
so
to me the big deal.
it is huge. It should be a big deal. And you should just, if you had social media accounts, I will say, make a video of this and say, I have never heard this. I should just contact Leon and says, I never heard this. You reach out to all your pastors and say, I never heard this. Have you heard this? Have you paid attention to this? That's what I do. Hey, have you paid attention to this?
You know what I feel? I always look like it must be my fault that they were covering it, but I wasn't paying attention. That could be a whole sermon by itself.
It could be. It could be. And this week, I mean, I almost did not select the resurrection story for Easter. But I would know everyone. Yeah. Everybody would be like, but there's so much in all of these stories.
Maybe that's part of why you never heard that, because they always.
Yeah, you want to talk about the stone being removed. How significant it is.
Another aspect of this, you hear repeatedly. His prayer and his sweating blood, and
The graphic parts.
being betrayed, and the disciples sleeping, all that stuff you hear all the time.
Oh, yes. When you're too close.
That sneaky angel got in here, and just nobody said anything about it.
I didn't pick up on it, but I did pick up on the solitude. If you read what I wrote here, it says, Jesus enters the hour of darkness alone. The key theme here is not only a rest, but solitude. Again, I was not even picking up the angel thing here. The reflection you share, stress, talking about Auntie Wright, that Jesus knew he had to go into this hour by himself. And yet again, yes, Jesus went through that door by himself, but not alone. He was strengthened.
It's his humanity.
Yes.
It's the fact that he's going to go through
Yes.
something that's very difficult.
I call it a deeper darkness, a greater trial, bearing the horror of evil and God forsakenness in a way that no one else is called to bear.
No one could take his place.
And why is that? Theologically speaking, it's understood that Jesus needed to be fully human to be able to die and fully God to be able to save us. The resurrection was never the goal. The goal was to unite us and for our sins to be forgiven and for us not to continue the slaughter of animals who would never be able to attain for the pain of sin. And so Jesus needed to die. And theologically speaking, a lot of people are struggling with that Jesus needed to die. I'm still resolving that idea in my mind, but there is a huge debate about the necessity of someone to die. There's a louder voices now calling for the universalism of faith. That ultimately God will be so loving that at the end, nobody will go to hell. And that is a concept that is being debated in other realms, especially in academia. There is huge debates. I recently just bought a book of peer-to-peer review articles that they are talking about the high theology. Like, I have to read paragraphs 2, 3, 4 times to be able to understand what they were talking about, because it goes beyond English. I mean, there are some heavy thinking, theologically speaking, out there that is accessible. But it takes a toll to read this kind of stuff. I mean, think about it. God is so loving that ultimately nobody will go to hell. What?
Satan doesn't have to worry about anything.
So
You know.
in the text that you have before you in Luke 22, we see several elements. One pointed out by Dawn. Are there additional elements that you are caught by surprise in these verses 39 to 53?
I think every bit of the rest of it is repeated year in and year out.
Mm-hmm.
None of the rest of that surprises me.
Mm-hmm. How many times have we heard the stress of why you're sleeping? And the slumber is not only sleeping as in you fall asleep, but slumber or sleepiness is about being distracted. Why are you distracted? This is the more important element. I mean, the most significant thing that we can do this week is to explore the scriptures deeper. Verse 47, but even as Jesus said this, a crowd approached led by Judas, one of the 12 disciples. Judas walked over to Jesus, greeted him with a kiss. But Jesus said, Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss? When the other disciples saw what was about to happen, they exclaimed, Lord, should we fight? We brought the swords. And one of them struck Peter, and one of them struck at a high priest's slave, slashing his right ear. But Jesus says, no more of this. And he touched the man's ear and healed him. Yeah. This is, again, if you go back to the temptation of Jesus in the desert, one of the temptations is for Jesus to jump from the top of the roof of the temple. And Jesus says that you will not tempt God, and that if he wanted to, would not God send legions of angels to defend him? You know? This is where it tells you, as Christians, is our role as Christians to defend Jesus. Taking these verses into account, if Jesus didn't want him to be defended by his disciples then, why do we feel the need to defend Jesus now? It's a big question. Not that I have answers, but it's a big question. So, one of the things that I was praying yesterday in reflection to this is, Father, strengthen me to remain faithful when the path, the journey, the task, the job is costly. I mean, how often are we willing to take the road less traveled because the costs of it? So, all right, let's move to 54 to 71, same chapter. But Jesus said, no more of this. And he touched the man's ear and healed him. Then Jesus spoke to the leading priests, the captains of the temple guard, and the elders who had come for him. I am so dangerous, revolutionary, he asked, that you come with me with swords and clubs to arrest me? Why didn't you arrest me in the temple? I was there every day. If you remember what we were talking about last week, Jesus was showing up every single time, and the elders and the Pharisees couldn't arrest him because people were loving every word that he was saying. And so they didn't arrest him. Why? Because they didn't want trouble with people. So they did it in the cover of the night. Why didn't you arrest me in the temple? I was there every day. But if this is your moment, the time when the power of darkness reigns. So they arrest him and led him to the high priest's home. And Peter followed at a distance. The guard lit a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat around it. And Peter joined them there. A servant girl noticed him in the firelight and began staring at him. Finally, she said, "This man was one of Jesus' followers." But Peter denied it. "Woman," he said, "I don't even know him." After a while, someone else looked at him and said, "You must be one of them." "No, I'm not," Peter retorted. About an hour later, someone else insisted, "This must be one of them because he is a Galilean too." But Peter said, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. At that moment, the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Suddenly, the Lord's words flashed through Peter's mind. "Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny me 3 times that you even know me." And Peter left the courtyard, weeping bitterly. The guards in charge of Jesus began mocking him and beating him. They blindfolded him and said, "Prophesy to us, who hit you that time?" And they hurled all sorts of terrible insults at him. At daybreak, all of the elders of the people assembly, including the leading priests and the teachers of religious law, Jesus was led before his high council. And they said, "Tell us, are you the Messiah?" But he replied, "If I tell you, you won't believe me. And if I ask you a question, you won't answer." Remember that Jesus was already asking questions of them while they were in daylight at the temple, and they chose not to answer. "But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated in the place of power at God's right hand." They all shouted, "So are you claiming to be the Son of God?" And he replied, "You say that I am." "Why do we need other witnesses?" they said. "We ourselves heard him say it." Tough reading, and yet Jesus is repeating himself here, right? So in the anti-Wright of this week, it talks about human weakness, bullying, and false justice all gather around Jesus. These days, more about Peter's denial. The reflection ties together Peter's exhaustion, the guards' cruelty, and the council's manipulation. The point is powerful. Jesus is not crucified in the abstract. He is crucified in the middle of very real human sin: fear, mockery, power games, and twisted justice. My prayer for today is that when my courage fails, as I'm only human, at some point I would say, well, how would Peter be able to do that? Why would Peter not just admit that he knew Jesus? And then you have to, he feared for his life. A very real fear where you are no longer in control of your reactions. So my prayer is that when my courage fails, do not let me remain there. Give me another chance. One idea that I took from this is this, and this is a famous poem. Even if you are not ready for the day, it cannot always be night. Have you heard that poem before? It's a beautiful poem. Wonderful woman who wrote it. Even if you're not ready for the day, it cannot always be night. And the poem continues that theme. Peter was not ready for the day. But God did not allow Peter to remain in darkness. And because of that, I am sure that Jesus would have forgiven Judas and given another opportunity to Judas. But Judas decided that he knew best and took his life. Now, there are several people who have taken their lives. And at this point is where I will encourage us not to judge those who have taken that path, but allow God to be God and for us to grieve, allowing us to be ones who grieve. Because it would be an oversimplification for us to think that we would have never done what Judas or Peter did. Thoughts? Talk to me about today. Is Peter's denial more than saying no? I believe so. And I believe that we are no stronger than Peter in many ways. Anything that caught your attention within the readings of these verses? Anything that was a wow factor for you?
Where the sweat fell to the ground like great drops of blood.
Okay.
Actually, I was reading a devotion yesterday
Mm-hmm.
from our Daily Bread Ministries.
Mm-hmm.
And it was brought out that can have to do is like documented evidence that this, when someone is in severe stress or fear of their life, it can be actually blood.
It said some here too.
Yeah. It is. It absolutely is. In moments of stress, do you know what your body does? My body requests food. When I eat my emotions. So when I'm under stress, I tend to eat, and my favorite thing to eat is French fries. And I eat French fries like I'm smoking a cigarette. Like I have an urge to eat French fries. McDonald's fries. Oh my gosh. I don't know what it does, but it does. Why? And so I'm taking medicine for that, that stress. And obviously I don't have a habit of smoking, but I have a habit of eating, especially when I am working late. You know, I'm typing a paper, it's 11 p.m., and what do? I don't go eat a fruit. No, I open the bag of chips. Potato chips, salty Lays, the original ones. Right? The ones that get to lick your fingers. But again, all of that is very human. And Jesus even is demonstrating here how very human it is. So Jesus experienced it. Peter experienced it. Why wouldn't we experience it? And at this point is where you must remember that grace operates in more significant ways. All right, let us move to Wednesday, tomorrow, Luke 23. So it continues to go through Luke. Beginning of verse 30, chapter 23, beginning of verse 1. Then the entire council took Jesus to Pilate, thank you, the Roman governor. They began to state their case. This man has been leading our people astray by telling them not to pay their taxes to the Roman government and by claiming he's the Messiah, a king. So Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of Jews?" Do you see the rhetoric here? Jesus had never said anything about not paying taxes. If you remember, when they show him the coin, Jesus said, "Give to God what belongs to God and give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar." But obviously, twisted words here. So Pilate asks him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replies, "You have said it." Pilate turned to the leading priests and to the crowd and said, "I find nothing wrong with this man." Then they became insistent. But he is causing riots by his teachings wherever he goes, all over Judea, from Galilee to Jerusalem. "Oh, is he a Galilean?" Pilate asked. When they said that he was, Pilate sent him to Herod Antipas, because Galilee was under Herod's jurisdiction, and Herod happened to be in Jerusalem at the time. Herod was delighted at the opportunity to see Jesus because he had heard about him and had been hoping for a long time to see him perform a miracle. He asked Jesus question after question, but Jesus refused to answer. Let us stop there. Why would Jesus refuse? If Jesus knows what the hour would come, why would Jesus continue to dodge the questions?
Because he doesn't want to stop the crucifixion from occurring. It's not a time to convince Herod or Pilate or anybody else that they're wrong.
Yeah. As a pastor, sometimes I am in positions where people want to debate Bible with me. And sometimes I take up the challenge and I have a great amount of, like a better word, fun debating Bible. But that's not every single time. Sometimes it's not the time or the place. I think that Jesus is reserving his energy. I think that Jesus is giving priority to what must take place. And so Jesus is not going to waste and invest his energy in things that will not bring the results that he knows must take place. This is an encouragement to us that not every fight is worth having. Here it says that Herod was excited to meet Jesus and watch him perform a miracle. Jesus is just not doing that. Why? Because it's not a priority for him. The priority at this moment is what? To fulfill word's prophecy and anticipating our salvation. So if the results are not going to change and you really are not asking questions to understand, why have those conversations? As Christians, we are in those positions. Sometimes it's better to walk away. Not always, but when you know that they are just convinced about what the ways that they are thinking, why would you invest time?
Think about his mindset.
Jesus'
He knows what's
mindset?
coming,
Are you talking about Jesus' mindset? Okay.
and he knows what's coming. Do I want to sit here and kick around theology or miracles, or I want to chit chat with these guys? Come on, let's go. Let's get on with it.
Mm-hmm.
It just is torturing him to delay the process further. Let's forget the chit chat.
Let's just forget the chit chat. That's a good way to put it. That's how I see. So I also notice that Jesus is not going to be entertaining false power. This day highlights the meeting between Jesus and Herod and the way Pilate and Herod, once enemies, have become friends in the process. They reflect makes much of Jesus' silence. He does not perform. He does not entertain. He does not seize power in the way earthly rulers expect. His kinship is true, but is not made of theater. So sometimes the silence is not weakness. It's a revelation. Jesus knows best. Have you heard that thing that says sometimes people want to bring you down to their level and beat you in experience? Jesus is just not going to be operating in that way. For this day, my prayer is this. Where I am tempted to prove myself, Jesus calls me to quiet faithfulness. This is a practical example for us. When you are feeling the urge to justify yourself, sometimes it's not necessary. When people get arrested, they get the Miranda rights. Miranda rights telling you that you have the right to remain silent. And everything that you say may be used against you. That's a practical advice, legal advice. No matter what you can say may be used against you. And so Jesus is very technical in that experience. You know, when we are feeling persecuted or angry, how many of us have misspoken or say hurtful things when we are in positions of stress? Jesus has not been allowed to sleep. Jesus has not been fed. Jesus has been mocked. Jesus has been abused. Jesus, even being Jesus, Jesus is human. Jesus might not be in the best position to have those conversations. So you have to read the room. That's a consideration. When we are tired, sometimes, or when we're caught by surprise. I do tell people that. If you want my raw response, catch me by surprise. If you want a more pastoral, really good answer, hey, Mario, let's meet. What is the meeting about? Oh, we're going to talk about this. Oh, let me think about it, and I will give you a better answer.
When people confronted me in business aggressively, I never felt it was the right thing to do to get in their face. I don't think good of any type comes from that.
Yes.
You're better off putting it aside for the moment and going to somewhere where you can be private, and I obviously had an office. Just consider why was this person acting that way?
Mm-hmm.
What's motivating them? What is the correct response?
Mm-hmm.
And go back to them. Never forget about it. Never let it go away.
Mm-hmm.
But confront it under more controlled circumstances. And I kind of sense the same type of thing here.
I agree.
That no good comes from that confrontation. As a matter of fact, quite often harm comes from it. People say things they shouldn't say.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Hurt one another. Regret what they've said.
Yes.
So maybe not saying it in the first place is the best thing.
Yes. Because sometimes when we're in positions where we have been the victims of attacks, they will do it seeking a response from us. And then it's no longer about what they did, but how you responded.
So I always thought initially that I was showing weakness. And, a lot of times I had to deal with salespeople or kind of like pastors,
Mm-hmm.
They think on their feet.
Mm-hmm.
They're smart. And
Yeah.
I always felt inadequate to respond in that manner. I thought it was a weakness. But later on I came to know that it was not a weakness. It was a strength that I didn't permit myself to be sucked into harmful situations.
Yeah. So I feel that is what is happening here in the text with Jesus. So everybody's being pressured here into responding. Pilate has been pressured into responded. And how he reacted to the pressure? Oh, Jesus is a Galilean. Oh, give it to Herod because that's his jurisdiction. And Herod is not really paying attention. He's excited about his own thing, but then he kicks it back. And again, they are playing this because nobody wants to make a decision.
Said they were enemies and then they became friends as a result. It's almost like that they both came to the common realization that this wasn't,
Mm-hmm.
like you take it, no, you take it. It was that type of thing where they kind of both realized that this was not a good situation and kind of commiserated.
Commiserated. Yes, that's right. Let us move to Thursday and continue reading. Now, verse 13. Then Pilate called together the leading priests and other religious leaders along with the people, and he announced his verdict. You brought this man to me, accusing him of leading a revolt. I have examined him thoroughly on this point in your presence and find him innocent. Herod came to the same conclusion and sent him back to us. Nothing this man has done calls for a death penalty. So I will have him flogged, and then I will release him. Then a mighty roar rose from the crowd, and with one voice they shout, "Kill him and release Barabbas to us." Barabbas was in prison for taking part in an insurrection in Jerusalem against the government and for murder. Pilate argued with them because he wanted to release Jesus, but they kept shouting, "Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him." For the third time, he demanded, "Why? What crime has he committed? I have found no reason to send him to death. So I will have him flogged, and then I will release him." But the mob shouted louder and louder, demanding that Jesus be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So Pilate sentenced Jesus to die as they demanded. As they had requested, he released Barabbas, the man in prison for insurrection and murder. But he turned Jesus over to them to do as they wish.
You mentioned this flogging. I read a lot of Bill O'Reilly's books, and one of them that he did, he's a historian,
Mm-hmm.
and he did a book called Killing Jesus, and it was made into a movie.
Okay.
It's from a historical perspective. But what you don't sense when you read this is what was actually involved with flogging. It was done with leather straps with stones tied to the end.
We sharpen.
It was designed to shred the skin on his back.
Mm-hmm.
It's the absolutely most brutal. You will never read the Bible again after watching or seeing what those people did to Jesus. And it just is something that I think if people have an opportunity to see that movie, it would give you a different perspective. It's not a religious movie. It's a historical movie.
Yeah.
But he's dealing with the facts of the time and what crucifixion was like and what flogging was like and things of that nature that we don't often get to see or discuss. But he chose to enlighten people, maybe kind of just gloss over that and think flogged, he got whacked a little bit and taken out to crucify. No, he was almost killed with the flogging.
Yeah. Any take on why would people shout to do such a thing?
I was going to ask you that.
Well, I asked first. What would motivate
Why
people?
are they so up against him?
Other gospels explain why. One is that there was spiritual leaders of the day, Pharisees and Sadducees, just sharing that. At this point, people don't have the vantage point. People don't recognize Jesus for who Jesus is. They want entertainment.
So I think the Sadducees and Pharisees were threatened by Jesus
Yes.
losing their power and position.
Mm-hmm.
They could see the crowd support that he had. So these were followers of the Pharisees and Sadducees that were yelling. They were trying to support the traditional point of view, I guess, and wanted him killed. Put an end to it.
Yeah. To the best of my recollection and what other theologians have shared, people will behave like this for the same reason that people used to attend lynching.
What?
It was entertainment.
People would attend crucifixions and shout on the killing of Jesus for the same reason that good people used to attend lynching in America 50 years ago. It's just the same premise, 50, 60 years ago.
It's a mob mentality.
It's a mob mentality. It is a mob. And obviously, Jesus' death is not warranted. But Barabbas, who was fighting against the Roman Empire and leading truly things punished by law at the time, he escapes. Talks about the depravity of human. It's easier to step on the flower than to kill the bug. It's a reality that as sinners, as people who are must be recipients of consequences, we find our place both in Barabbas, but also in the other character mentioned of the verse. So I'm going to read verse 26 now. As they led Jesus away, a man named Simon, who was from Cyrene, happened to be coming in from the countryside. The soldiers seized him and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus.
I didn't understand why they picked him.
Well, let's take into account that Jesus doesn't have supernatural power. Jesus still has to carry the cross. And it's not the cross that we resemble. Remember that Jesus is only carrying the horizontal beam of the wood. Jesus is not carrying the whole cross, because the whole cross is already, the vertical one is already on the ground.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, so Jesus is carrying only the horizontal one. But Jesus, again, has not been able to sleep, has no food. He was just flogged. He's damaged. He's only human. And Jesus still needs to go from point A to point B, and there is a big piece of wood that someone has to carry. And why would the Roman soldiers do it?
Discrimination. He was from Africa.
Yes.
That's my theory.
No, it is. It's many of these things. Why would,
Cyrenes in Africa.
So countryside, obviously, common. If you stick only with that knowledge, he was an outsider. And the Romans, if you remember, could demand the Jews to carry things on their behalf for a particular amount of spaces. Romans could force people into labor as long as it's control.
That's where in the Chosen they showed that situation with Jesus and the disciples
Mm-hmm.
and the Romans, and they want him to carry it for a mile, and Jesus
Yes.
wanted to carry it for whatever.
Yeah,
long.
and that's historical, not scriptural. That part of knowledge is historical. That's what Romans would do. They will force people into labor as long as it was quantified. theologically speaking, don't we see evil men getting away with it and innocent men paying the price time after time? Here is two examples of two men who were innocent. Simon and Jesus are innocents, and yet the guilty one gets away with it. It's a reminder of the reality of where we exist. And it makes us think about Simon carrying a heavy burden, and how we sometimes, if we are not careful, we force strangers to carry our burden. When we get a bad day and we encounter a stranger, don't we sometimes force our burden onto others? So it's a lot to consider. It's a lot to process. The main insight that I take from N.T. Wright here, I write, the reflection is clear. All sinners are invited to see themselves in Barabbas. Jesus comes under condemnation in the place of the guilty. At the same time, Simon's forced carrying on of the cross becomes a living image of what Jesus has been teaching all along about taking up the cross and following him. That's what N.T. Wright is saying. There is a cross to bear. And you might say, Simon is innocent, right? Simon just came into the picture. However, did Christ die for all? And if Christ died for all, then all were warned of consequences. So even if Simon was just coming into the picture, Simon was equally something, and Jesus needed to die even on behalf of Simon, who was innocent at this moment, at this time. And we know nothing about Simon. Does that make sense? Even if Simon just shows up into the picture of the story, there is something that Simon has to suffer consequences of, and we know nothing about.
I'm saying it was just discrimination. It does say that Cyrene is in northern Africa, so he's an African. And I'm guessing the black guy shows up and they say, hey,
Yeah.
one of them carries.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I think it could be an obvious element of discrimination.
I
He hasn't
don't.
done anything wrong. He was just there, but you can see he's
Yeah.
a black man and
Yeah.
he's fine.
Sometimes by the virtue of where we are and who we are, we end up carrying crosses that don't belong to us.
It doesn't tell you any more.
It doesn't tell you anything more. And so N.T. Wright helps me to consider how sometimes we have people taking our crosses and how we are to carry our cross, and how we have to reflect on trying to not put the burden that we are to carry on others, and how sometimes the innocent are punished and how those who are to suffer the consequences do not. And this is where the justice of God will prevail. Justice sees the actions of Simon. Jesus will see the actions of Barabbas. And ultimately, justice will be served, not according to our will, but the will of God. So it is something to consider about the participants of this story. Now let us move to verse 27, same chapter. A large crowd trailed behind, including many grief-stricken women. But Jesus turned and said to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, don't weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For the days are coming when they will say, 'Fortunate indeed are the women who are childless, the wombs that have not borne a child, and the breasts that have never nursed.' People will beg the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and plead with the hills, 'Bury us.' For if these things are done when the tree is green, what will happen when it's dry?" Let us stop there for a second. Have you ever considered that question? Have you ever paid attention to that question? Verse 31. For if these things are done when the tree is green, what would happen when it's dry? And what is the text making reference to?
I was thinking end of time.
Yes, the end of times. Definitely. Almost word by word, what Jesus is describing against the woman is what you see of humanity in reflection when the destruction happens in the book of Revelation. When there is destructions and the thunders and the beast shows up and all the persecution and all that happens. There's people that try to hide and there's people that get killed and there are mountains that are moving and stuff like that. Almost word by word, Jesus is proclaiming that was better not to be born than to go through the judgment day. If you had to consider verse 31, for if these things are done when the tree is green, what does that mean? I want you to think about miracles. In times of Jesus, miracles, the activity of God was so evident that the blind would see and the dead will be resurrected. These were miracles that happened. The ground was green with the presence of God. Nowadays, you may say or consider miracles are more sporadic. You have to look harder to see miracles. We attribute many miracles to science than the will of God. That's one way that the world is dry now. We can explain miracles through science. We have gained more knowledge, and so we think that we know better now than before. This is the faith of children. The faith of children, when they are children, is green. You tell them God is real, and they believe you. God will heal you, and they will believe you. You're scared, pray, and God will come and save you. They will believe you. But as you mature, you use wonder and knowledge, and you stop believing like a child, and you believe like an adult. And so your imagination goes dry, and your faith goes dry. Does that make sense?
Yes.
This is where I believe the question is taking us. I continue on verse 32. Two others, both criminals, were led out to be executed with him. When they came to a place called the Skull, they nailed him to the cross, and the criminals were also crucified, one to his right and one to his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing." And the soldiers gambled for his clothing by throwing dice. The crowd watched as the leaders scoffed. "He saved others," they said. "Let him save himself if he is really God's Messiah, the chosen one." The soldiers mocked him too by offering him a drink of sour wine. They called out to him, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." A sign was fastened above him with these words, "This is the king of the Jews." One of the criminals hanging beside him scoffed, "So you are the Messiah, are you? Prove it by saving yourself and us too while you are at it." Let me stop there. This is something that we know. These are the final times. The two thieves, one to the right, one to the left. We think about the sons of Zebedee, who wanted to be to the right and to the left of Jesus on his day of glory. This is Jesus' day of glory. And Jesus told the sons of Zebedee, the sons of thunder, "You don't know what you're asking." What is the day of glory? The day where Jesus surrenders his life. chooses to die. He could have done what they were asking, coming down from the cross, killing all the enemies. But this is where Jesus did not come to display this kind of power. What is the kind of power that we see reflected in Jesus on this day? You see how Jesus is challenging our understanding of what power is and what power does?
Showing forgiveness while he's being crucified.
Mm-hmm.
That shows an element of power that we're not accustomed to.
Father, forgive us. We do not fully know what we're doing. It's a prayer that we ought to continue to say as we exercise our faith and our discipleship. We think we know. We don't. We don't choose forgiveness when we have power. Jesus is dying the death of a lawbreaker, bearing the faith he had warned would come, yet remaining innocent, mocked as king while revealing true kinship, praying forgiveness and promising paradise. This is where, if you continue reading, the good thief tells Jesus, take me today into your kingdom, and Jesus promises that kingdom.
Interesting that that guy believes justice is being done. He believes he deserves to die for what he's done.
Yes, but not this innocent man. All right, let us move to Matthew now. Now, we are switching gears here from Luke to Matthew. This is from N.T. Wright, who chose to go to Matthew now. Beginning of verse 57. As evening approached, Joseph, a rich man from Arimathea, who had become a follower of Jesus, went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body, and Pilate issued an order to release it to him. Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a long sheet of clean linen cloth. He placed it in his own new tomb, which had been carved out of the rock. Then he rolled a great stone across the entrance and left. Both Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were sitting across from the tomb and watching. The next day, on the Sabbath, the leading priests and Pharisees went to see Pilate. They told him, "Sir, we remember that the deceiver once said that while he was still alive, after 3 days, I will raise from the dead. So we request that you seal the tomb until the 3rd day. This will prevent his disciples from coming and stealing his body and then telling everyone he was raised from the dead. If that happens, it will be worse off than we were at first." Pilate replied, "Take guards and secure it the best you can." So they sealed the tomb and posted guards to protect it. Holy Saturday, I write, is the silence of the sealed tomb and the stillness before vindication. The reflection emphasizes from N.T. Wright that Matthew tells the burial careful because the burial matters. Remember that Matthew was a gospel written for Jewish people who were practicing Christianity. For them, it was very important, these details. The mention of the Sabbath, that has its own connotation. I mean, Mary and Martha went to great length to buy the spices that they needed. It's Sabbath. Nothing is open. They had to prepare. So think about the incidence of that. Matthew is placing, in the second paragraph, Matthew is placing the pieces so that the coming resurrection cannot be dismissed as confusion about the tomb, the body, and the burial, and yet the reflection is also honest, still leaves room for doubt. The real question is whether the living God would do such a thing for Israel's Messiah. The author of Matthew is talking and addressing questions directly linked to the Jewish community believing in Jesus. This was a theory that many people, including some of us, would argue still to this day. Is the resurrection real? Have you ever considered that if the resurrection didn't happen, our Christian faith wouldn't have a base to stand on? So, if there is anything that I want to consider for this reading, is what happens between silence. What happens after his death on Friday night? What happens Saturday? Can you consider the desolation that happens? You know what I'm going to do Saturday? The Saturday before Easter? I'm going to be coaching baseball. I'm going to be coaching. The world really doesn't pay attention to that silence. We quickly move from the crucifixion to Easter. In fact, most churches don't have the theology to consider none of the suffering. They go from Palm to Sunday Easter because who really wants to sit and dwell on death and suffering? Isn't there enough stress in life for you to be considering death during Holy Week? I mean, how many of us sit and reminisce in dark and painful things? Nobody does. Nobody wants to. But there is purpose in that silence. There is purpose in acknowledging that suffering. Matthew goes on that length. He takes Jesus. There was a new believer, Joseph, and invested his own time and money in a new tomb and put Jesus there. So how can we consider silent as the important part? If there is anything this week, how Jesus is silent when he's being provoked, Jesus remained purposeful even in suffering. Jesus remains silent asking for help, and yet he receives it. Jesus remains silent when Peter actually denies it, and Jesus doesn't shout back to Judas when Judas kissed him, but says, "Is this how you betray the Son of Man?" If there's anything this week, it's teaching us how to suffer well, purposeful, how to display, how to take on a cross. Simon from Cyrene didn't fight. He just took the cross that was not his and carried it. So there's many elements that this week demands for us to find those words in silence. Now, moving to Sunday, I was tempted to only use Luke 23. If you want to remember what that was, let us go to Luke 23. Beginning of verse 33. When they came to a place called the Skull, they nailed him to the cross. And the criminals were also crucified, and one on his right and one on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." And the soldiers gambled for his clothing and throwing dice. The crowd watched, and the leaders scoffed. He saved others. They said, let him save himself if he's really God's Messiah, the chosen one. The soldiers mocked him too by offering him a drink of sour wine. They called out to him, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." A sign was fastened above him with these words, "This is the king of the Jews." One of the criminals hanging beside him scoffed, "So you are the Messiah, are you? Prove it by saving yourself and us too while you're at it." But the other criminal protested, "Don't you fear God even when you have been sentenced to die? We deserve to die for our crimes, but this man hasn't done anything wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus replied, "I assure you, today you will be with me in paradise." By this time it was about noon, and darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. The light from the sun was gone, and suddenly the curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn down the middle. Then Jesus shouted, "Father, I entrust my spirit into your hands." And with those words, he breathed his last. There is another second scripture that I'm picking. That's chapter 24, verses 1 to 6. But very early on Sunday morning, the woman went to the tomb taking the spices they had prepared. They found that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance, so they went in. But they didn't find the body of the Lord Jesus. As they stood there, puzzled, two men suddenly appeared to them, clothed in dazzling robes. The women were terrified and bowed with their faces to the ground. Then the men asked, "Why are you looking among the dead for someone who is alive? He isn't here. He is risen from the dead. Remember what he told you back in Galilee." Why these two scriptures? Because I think telling the resurrection story without acknowledging where it was coming, I don't think it paints a good picture. And I get it. Most people want the resurrection benefits. But remember the end of that verse 6. Remember what he told you back in Galilee. So why these passages? Because even if you're not ready for the day, it cannot always be night. But you have to remember where we come from. On Easter, we have to remember where we come from so that we know where we're going. Both of them hold much of the full story, the sorrow of the cross and the joy of the resurrection. Jesus continues to be adamant about the hope of the resurrection, the hope of our faith. However, that hope of our faith does not exclude us from suffering, from painful things. So on this day, we cling to the resurrection, and yet we know the resurrection doesn't come out of nowhere, but comes from the desire that God had to renew his love for us. And so the stone is rolled away. The tomb is found empty. Confusion gives way to wonder. An announcement is made. He's not here. He has risen. What does that word risen mean? This is where I'm going with. Risen is more than not dead. Risen means increase and augmented. The word risen is not simply alive again. We are people risen today. That's the sermon. Are you living a life that is worthy to call be risen? Have you died to yourself, and have you risen for the purposes of the gospel. To forgive, to care. What does it mean to choose to live in light of the resurrection today for your family and friends? Would this be a good day to forgive, to find a new life, a new purpose, to let go of what is already easy, and to find new purposes in the gospel? Risen is more than just alive again. Is that our life has increased in purpose, and that we have, in many ways, our vision has been augmented, increased. So what would you do with this different understanding of what your life is today? So if you look at the last page, you will see quickly how this is a great sermon series. Main themes for the week: Jesus faces the darkness alone. Human sin is concrete, not abstract. Jesus is the true king in an upside down way. Jesus takes the place of the guilty. Discipleship means following the crucified Jesus, and the burial matters because resurrection will matter. It's been a wonderful week. I have continued to love this book because of what it does. It makes me think. It's putting my perception not upside down, but definitely is asking me to look deeply within the feelings of the text. So I have really loved this Lent series, and how it doesn't end this week, but next week takes it up a notch. Very, very cool. Final thoughts from you?
One thing I thought was weird that popped in my head was Joseph was there when Jesus was born, and Joseph was there. Another one was there when he passed away.
Yeah.
And stepped up. And I looked up, and part of what Joseph means, one of the words it means is hope.
Mm-hmm. Good. Joseph.
Oh, Joseph
Yeah.
means.
Joseph. Yeah.
That one of, it means a lot of things, but one of them that popped out was hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a wonderful consideration to think that Joseph was there to fulfill his role. And just like the first Joseph, this Joseph does his job and then disappears. You don't know anything about him. He comes and goes. He does his job. The other day, my son told me that I know nothing about anything.
Oh, yeah, he's getting that age.
I laughed and I said, isn't it wonderful that the people that depend on me tell me that I know nothing? And I just laugh and I will just do my job.
Out of the mouth of babes.
Oh, yes.
When he's in his 30s, he'll know that how smart you were.
And I just quickly remember how I said it to my father too.
Yeah, when we look at this Lenten series, it's easy to dwell on the burden, the negative, the darkness of it all. But isn't it nice to get the Easter Sunday morning? Our church we used to go to had a sunrise service.
Mm-hmm.
People put on their Easter bonnets, sun's shining, Jesus Christ is risen today, hallelujah.
Mm-hmm.
And how the mood changes on Easter Day.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully people are lifted by that.
Yeah. That's
Leave church with a smile on their face and a positive mood. He is risen.
He's risen indeed. It's not a small thing. It's not a small thing. But if the resurrection is a meal for us to enjoy, we have to make sure that we know where it comes from and what are the elements. I have really enjoyed this this week of readings, forcing me to really consider. I love when it forces me to go rather from chapter to chapter, it goes and follows the story, especially in Luke. There's something wonderful about it. So I pray that you find this of benefit and that you continue the readings of this week. And yeah, let's go from there. My friends, that's all for today. Until I see you next time, may you continue to rely on the good news of the gospel and with anticipation await for the great news of resurrection. For we gain new perspective and new insight about what God continues to challenge us with. Go in peace.
See you Sunday.
See you Sunday. Or Thursday if you're coming.
Thursday, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for all your comments.
Yes.